The global order is no longer quietly shifting, it is being openly challenged. What was once unthinkable is now spoken aloud by major powers, and the rules that governed alliances, borders, and sovereignty are under visible strain. At the center of this moment is Greenland, a frozen landmass that has suddenly become a geopolitical fault line, as Donald Trump revives territorial pressure through tariffs, threats, and economic coercion. Canada, under Mark Carney, steps forward in a way it has not in decades. This is not a story about one island. It is a test of whether deterrence still works, whether alliances still matter, and whether mid-sized powers can still shape history. Canada steps forward as the Arctic becomes a flashpoint. Canada has spent a generation avoiding the spotlight of global confrontation. It has preferred quiet diplomacy, coalition building, and moral persuasion over overt deterrence. That posture is now changing, rapidly. As tensions rise over Greenland, Canada is no longer positioning itself as a background supporter of NATO unity, but as an active, stabilizing force willing to put assets, credibility, and political capital on the line. The possibility of deploying Canadian troops to Greenland is not symbolic theater. It is a calculated signal rooted in NATO doctrine and Arctic reality. Greenland is no longer a distant expanse of ice and isolation. It sits astride emerging Arctic shipping lanes, controls access to the North Atlantic, and anchors the northern defense perimeter of NATO. As climate change accelerates ice melt, Greenland's strategic value has increased faster than the political systems meant to manage it. That reality is well understood in Washington, and now increasingly in Ottawa. Donald Trump's renewed fixation on Greenland reframes the region from cooperative security to transactional leverage. Tariffs, economic pressure, and implicit threats are used not as negotiating tools, but as instruments of coercion. This approach forces allies into an uncomfortable choice: absorb economic pain or risk the appearance of territorial vulnerability. Canada's response breaks that dilemma by reframing the issue altogether. By preparing to deploy troops under NATO exercises, Canada asserts that sovereignty is not negotiable and deterrence is not optional. This move carries real consequences. Positively, it strengthens NATO's northern flank at a moment when unity is under pressure. It reassures Denmark and Greenland that alliance commitments are not abstract promises, but actionable guarantees. It also sends a message to smaller nations watching closely. Standing up to coercion is still possible when allies act together. Markets too respond to clarity. Predictability, even amid tension, is preferable to ambiguity that invites escalation. But the risks are real. Canada's deeper involvement exposes it to economic retaliation from the United States, its largest trading partner. It raises domestic political stakes, particularly for voters wary of military entanglements. It also increases the risk of miscalculation in a region where military infrastructure is sparse, distances are vast, and communication errors can escalate quickly. Deterrence works only if signals are read correctly, and history is full of moments where they were not. What makes this moment distinct is preparation. Mark Carney's actions did not begin in Greenland. They began months earlier with strategic diversification. Canada expanded trade channels with China, not as alignment, but as insulation. It secured major investment commitments from Qatar, strengthening energy and financial resilience. These moves reduced Canada's vulnerability to U.S. economic pressure, creating room to maneuver where other allies remain constrained. This groundwork transforms Canada's stance from rhetorical resistance into credible deterrence. For Trump, Canada's posture disrupts expectations. Pressure tactics rely on hesitation, fragmentation, and silence. Instead, Canada offers visibility, coordination, and readiness. The presence of Canadian troops, even in limited numbers, complicates any narrative of unilateral leverage. It reframes Greenland not as an object of negotiation, but as a shared responsibility. Yet this is not anti-American. It is institutional resistance to chaos. Canada is not challenging the United States as a nation, but a method of power that bypasses rules in favor of intimidation. In doing so, Canada positions itself as a bridge between anxious European allies and an unpredictable Washington, attempting to slow escalation before it hardens into confrontation. The Arctic is becoming the proving ground for 21st century deterrence. Canada's decision to step forward marks a departure from caution toward leadership. Whether that leadership stabilizes the system or draws Canada deeper into global fault lines will depend on what happens next. But one thing is already clear: Canada is no longer sitting out history. Trump's strategy of pressure and the fracturing of the old rules. Donald Trump's approach to Greenland does not emerge from a vacuum. It is the continuation of a worldview that treats economic power, territorial ambition, and political pressure as interchangeable tools. In this framework, tariffs are not merely trade instruments, but weapons. Alliances are not shared commitments, but leverage points. Sovereignty is not a settled principle, but a variable, tested, stretched, and exploited if resistance appears weak. The renewed pressure on Greenland follows this logic precisely. Rather than pursuing negotiation through diplomatic channels or multilateral institutions, Trump's strategy relies on escalation first, tariffs against European allies, threats tied to jobs and investment, and public rhetoric questioning existing borders are meant to force concessions through discomfort. The underlying assumption is simple: economic pain will outweigh political resolve. That assumption has worked before in fragmented environments. What makes this moment dangerous is that it is being applied within NATO itself. The immediate negative effect of this strategy is destabilization. When a NATO member openly suggests territorial acquisition, directly or indirectly, it undermines the foundational trust that the alliance depends on. NATO is not just a military pact. It is a credibility system. Each member's security rests on the belief that borders are respected and commitments are mutual. Once that belief erodes, deterrence weakens everywhere, not just in the Arctic. Greenland becomes the focal point, but the implications ripple outward. If economic coercion can be used to challenge Denmark's sovereignty over Greenland without consequence, then smaller states across Europe and beyond are forced to reconsider their own security assumptions. Silence becomes complicity. Hesitation becomes vulnerability. This is precisely the environment in which revisionist powers thrive. There are, however, perceived positives within Trump's approach, at least for his political base. It projects strength, decisiveness, and unilateral control. It frames international relations as transactions where America extracts maximum advantage. Domestically, this rhetoric resonates with voters frustrated by globalization and skeptical of multilateral constraints. It reinforces the image of a leader willing to challenge norms rather than defend them. But that strength is brittle. It depends on others backing down. When they do not, as in the case of Canada's response, the strategy loses momentum and begins to expose its costs. Public opinion data already shows significant discomfort within the United States itself, including among Republican voters, with aggressive posturing over Greenland. Many view it as a misadventure that risks America's reputation and long-term security framework. Internationally, the damage is more pronounced. European allies are forced into crisis coordination mode. Markets react to uncertainty rather than confidence. Diplomatic bandwidth that could address Ukraine, climate security, or economic recovery is instead consumed by containment efforts. The rules-based order, already strained, bends further under pressure. This is where the contrast with Canada's approach sharpens. Trump's strategy accelerates fragmentation. Carney's strategy seeks to slow it. One relies on fear of loss, the other on reassurance of solidarity. One treats tariffs as weapons, the other treats trade diversification as armor. One escalates unpredictably, the other prepares methodically. Yet the risk remains that escalation feeds escalation. Trump's rhetoric, combined with visible NATO movements, increases the chances of misinterpretation. What one side frames as deterrence, the other may frame as provocation. In the Arctic, where infrastructure is thin and reaction times are compressed, this ambiguity is especially dangerous. The broader geopolitical consequence is this: if Trump's model succeeds, coercion replaces consensus as the dominant currency of power. If it fails, it accelerates the emergence of alternative leadership centers within the alliance. Canada's actions suggest the latter may already be underway. The question is no longer whether the old rules are under strain. It is whether they will be defended loudly enough to survive. NATO, allies, and the global stakes of the Greenland test. The confrontation over Greenland is not simply a bilateral dispute or a momentary flare-up driven by rhetoric. It is a stress test for NATO itself. For decades, the alliance has relied on an unspoken assumption that internal disagreements would never escalate into threats against sovereignty. That assumption is now being tested in real time, and the response, or lack of one, will shape global security far beyond the Arctic. For NATO allies, the situation creates an uncomfortable dual pressure. On one side is the United States, the alliance's most powerful member, whose security guarantees remain indispensable. On the other is the principle that NATO was built to defend, the inviolability of borders and the collective response to coercion. When these two forces collide, smaller and mid-sized nations face an existential dilemma. Align too closely with pressure tactics, and the alliance loses moral legitimacy. Resist without coordination, and they risk isolation. Canada's potential troop deployment to Greenland becomes significant precisely because it breaks this paralysis. It signals that NATO unity does not require silence. It requires action calibrated to defend principles without triggering open confrontation. By framing the deployment as infrastructure protection and sovereignty exercises, Canada anchors its response firmly within NATO's defensive mandate. This distinction matters. It preserves legitimacy while restoring deterrence. The positive effects of this approach ripple quickly. Denmark and Greenland receive tangible reassurance that they are not standing alone. European allies gain confirmation that NATO's northern flank is not an afterthought, but a shared priority. For countries on NATO's eastern edge, particularly those watching Russia's behavior closely, the message is even clearer. If the alliance can hold the line in the Arctic, it may yet hold it elsewhere. But the risks remain substantial. NATO cohesion depends not only on shared values, but on synchronized messaging. Divergent signals, some leaders calling for restraint, others for firmness, can blur deterrence and invite testing. Russia, in particular, benefits from ambiguity. A distracted or divided NATO in the Arctic weakens deterrence in Europe, stretching alliance resources and attention across multiple fronts. From Moscow's perspective, Greenland is not the prize. Fragmentation is. There is also the economic dimension. Heightened Arctic tensions threaten shipping routes, energy investments, and insurance markets. The Arctic is increasingly viewed as a commercial corridor, not just a military frontier. Instability raises costs and discourages long-term planning. For global markets already jittery from geopolitical shocks, Greenland becomes another variable in an increasingly complex risk environment. This is why the World Economic Forum in Davos takes on unusual importance. It is not merely a stage for speeches, but a coordination hub. Behind closed doors, leaders attempt to align red lines, reassure investors, and prevent unilateral moves from spiraling into systemic crises. Mark Carney's presence there is not ceremonial. It reflects a growing recognition that economic stability and security are now inseparable. Trump's expected presence at Davos sharpens the contrast. Two visions of global order coexist in the same space. One treats pressure as leverage and unpredictability as strength. The other treats coordination as resilience and deterrence as prevention. The outcome will not be decided by speeches, but by whether leaders leave Davos aligned or divided. The Greenland test exposes a deeper truth. NATO's greatest vulnerability is not military capacity, but political coherence. Canada's role, while limited in scale, is outsized in symbolism. It demonstrates that middle powers can still influence outcomes when they act early and decisively. Whether that influence is enough to stabilize the alliance depends on how others respond. Greenland, in this sense, is not the endgame. It is the warning shot, a signal that the rules-based order will either be defended collectively or rewritten through pressure and precedent. NATO's response here will echo far beyond the Arctic, shaping the credibility of alliances in an era where silence is no longer neutral. Winners, losers, and the cost of standing firm. Every geopolitical confrontation creates winners and losers, but not always in obvious ways. The standoff over Greenland is no exception. While the immediate focus remains on military positioning and diplomatic rhetoric, the deeper effects are unfolding across political systems, economies, and public opinion, quietly determining who gains resilience and who absorbs long-term cost. For Canada, the potential benefits of standing firm are substantial. By stepping forward early, Canada enhances its credibility as a serious strategic actor rather than a passive ally. This elevation carries influence in NATO deliberations, in global economic forums, and in future crisis negotiations. Middle powers often struggle to convert values into leverage. Canada's actions show how preparation can turn principle into power. There is also a domestic upside. Leadership during uncertainty reinforces national identity as a defender of multilateral order and rules-based stability, values that resonate deeply within Canada's political culture. Denmark and Greenland are clear short-term beneficiaries. Visible allied support reduces vulnerability and deters unilateral pressure. For Greenland itself, long treated as strategically important but politically peripheral, the moment forces long overdue recognition of its role in global security. That recognition, if managed carefully, could translate into infrastructure investment, economic development, and a stronger voice in decisions that directly affect its future. Within NATO, countries that favor collective deterrence gain momentum. The alliance's northern and eastern members see reaffirmation that security guarantees still have substance. This strengthens internal cohesion, at least among those aligned around defending sovereignty without ambiguity. Markets, too, benefit from clarity. While tension increases volatility in the short term, decisive alignment reduces the risk of sudden shocks driven by miscalculation. But there are losers as well. Trump's approach risks isolating the United States within its own alliance. Even if pressure tactics extract concessions in isolated cases, the cumulative effect erodes trust. Allies begin to hedge, diversifying trade, strengthening regional coalitions, and reducing dependence. Over time, this weakens American leverage rather than expanding it. Influence built on coercion decays faster than influence built on consent. There are domestic costs for Canada as well. Standing firm is not free. Trade retaliation, investment uncertainty, and political backlash are real risks. Military deployments, even limited ones, invite scrutiny and criticism. Public support can fracture if tensions escalate or if economic pain becomes visible. Carney's strategy assumes that preparation offsets these risks, but assumption must be tested in practice. Smaller NATO states face the hardest trade-offs, align too openly with resistance, and they risk becoming economic targets. Hesitate, and they risk exposure if norms collapse. This creates uneven burden sharing within the alliance, a fault line that adversaries can exploit. Unity is not automatic. It must be continuously reinforced. The global system itself absorbs the greatest cost. Each challenge to sovereignty, even if contained, chips away at the predictability that underpins trade, investment, and diplomacy. The Greenland crisis adds to a growing list of flashpoints where escalation feels easier than resolution. Stability becomes something to be actively maintained, not passively assumed. Yet there is a paradox here. Crises clarify. They force choices that reveal priorities. In Greenland, Canada chooses engagement over avoidance. NATO faces a moment to reaffirm or dilute its core principles. Trump's strategy forces allies to decide whether pressure will define the next era of geopolitics. Who ultimately wins depends on endurance. Deterrence works only if resolve outlasts pressure. Canada's bet is that preparation, coordination, and clarity will prove more sustainable than coercion. The costs are real, but so are the stakes. In a world where rules are increasingly contested, the price of standing firm may be high, but the price of retreat may be higher still. Solutions, strategic choices, and the path forward. The Greenland crisis does not present a clean or immediate resolution. It is not a problem that can be solved through a single agreement, troop deployment, or diplomatic statement. Instead, it demands a layered response, one that balances deterrence with de-escalation, unity with flexibility, and principle with pragmatism. The choices made now will determine whether this moment becomes a turning point toward stability or a precedent for further erosion of global norms. The first and most urgent solution lies in alliance coordination. NATO cannot afford mixed signals. Clear, unified messaging that economic coercion and territorial pressure are unacceptable within the alliance is essential. This does not require confrontation, but consistency. Exercises, deployments, and diplomatic language must reinforce the same boundary. Sovereignty is non-negotiable. Canada's approach provides a template, visible, measured, and firmly rooted in collective defense rather than unilateral escalation. Second, economic resilience must become a core security strategy. Carney's early moves to diversify trade and secure alternative investment streams illustrate how economic preparation underpins political independence. Allies vulnerable to tariff pressure need options. Diversification does not mean decoupling, but it does mean reducing single-point dependencies that can be exploited. A resilient economy gives diplomacy credibility and deterrence staying power. Third, dialogue must remain open, even with tension high. Containment without communication increases the risk of miscalculation. Back-channel talks, multilateral forums, and crisis hotlines are not signs of weakness. They are safeguards against unintended escalation. The World Economic Forum and similar venues offer opportunities not for public posturing, but for quiet alignment and de-escalation. There are also responsibilities on the U.S. side. Long-term American influence has always rested on leadership that blends power with predictability. Restoring trust within NATO requires reassurance that pressure tactics will not replace shared decision-making. Public opinion within the United States already reflects discomfort with aggressive posturing over Greenland. That sentiment can become a corrective force, if political space allows it. For Canada, the path forward requires maintaining balance. Leadership brings influence, but also exposure. Sustaining public support, managing economic risk, and avoiding overextension will be critical. Deterrence must remain proportional and clearly defensive. The goal is not to escalate, but to stabilize. Ultimately, Greenland is a mirror held up to the global system. It reflects a world where silence is no longer neutral, where mid-sized powers must choose between relevance and retreat, and where alliances are tested not by external enemies alone, but by internal strain. Solutions will not come from one actor acting alone, but from coordinated resolve. This is where viewers come in. Public pressure, informed debate, and democratic accountability shape how far leaders can go and how responsibly they act. Should alliances draw firmer lines? Should economic tools be separated from security coercion? Should middle powers play a larger role in enforcing global norms? These questions do not have simple answers, but they demand engagement. History is not only shaped in summits and strategy rooms, it is shaped by the expectations citizens place on those who lead. Greenland may be the test case, but the outcome will define far more than one island in the Arctic. The struggle over Greenland is not about territory alone. It is about the future of global order. It asks whether rules still restrain power, whether alliances still defend principles, and whether preparation can outweigh coercion. Canada's response under Mark Carney shows that leadership is still possible, even in an era of uncertainty. But leadership carries cost, and stability requires collective effort. As this crisis unfolds, the choices made by governments and the voices of the public will shape what comes next. The Arctic may seem distant, but the consequences of this moment will be felt far beyond the ice.